Of all the forces to engage in the August 1914 battles, the German was best equipped with artillery. German military doctrine of the time relied on artillery to play a major role in breaking the enemy line. The German artillery branch was to be equally powerful throughout the war, employing many new designs during its length. The prowess of the German artillery branch was witnessed at Verdun and at the opening barrages of the spring offensives in 1918. The Entente powers were not oblivious to this success, and in June 1919, in the Treaty of Versailles, they took steps to severely cut back the artillery of the new cut-down 100,000-man Reichswehr. The Allies took steps to limit the capacity of the Krupp and Rheinmetall Kombins to manufacture new guns, curtailing severely the caliber and quantity they could manufacture. Krupp was restricted to calibers of 17 centimeters and larger, and Rheinmetall to below that number. As with other prohibited research into new weapons, these companies sent their design teams abroad to conduct secret research in this way. Krupps and Rheinmetall were in a position to benefit from the clandestine decision of Adolf Hitler in early 1933 to break the Versailles Treaty and begin rearming the German armed forces. The objectives of Germany's new master called for an enormous expansion in the number of guns and in the quantity of artillery needed. While most of the types of artillery to be employed throughout the war were already in the design stage and in the process of being brought into production, the design groups in both companies now set their creative minds to work addressing new challenges. The government drafted orders rapidly for the whole range of artillery types, from the small infantry gun right up to the rail guns. Other companies were also contracted to produce shells and produce the explosives and propellant charges to use in them. Other matters of relevance to the development of a greater artillery arm were the production of the new prime movers. 1, 3, 5, 8, 12 and 18-ton half-tracks, all of which would have their own role in pulling the new artillery for the army. The military had already decided to standardize on some simple calibers quite early in the 30s. By mid-decade, the 75mm infantry gun, SIG-33, 105mm field howitzer, and 150mm heavy howitzer, flak and 37mm anti-tank guns were already being mass-produced and being delivered to the Wehrmacht in increasing quantities. Groups were also manufacturing very heavy guns to complement the shipbuilding program of the Navy. The majority of the warships that were never built because of the war breaking out would eventually fall into the Army's hands in due course. No wonder that unemployment soon dropped in Germany following the massive investment by the state in the rearmament effort. The only problem for the Army was that it was designed for a short war. As Hitler openly repudiated the Treaty of Versailles and proclaimed the remilitarization of the German army, he was unable to resist bragging of their growing strength in public demonstrations of military power designed to awe as well as terrorize. Center stage at these displays were the big guns whose very size made them immensely powerful symbols of the growing strength of the Wehrmacht. The same guns would, within a few years, be pounding armies and cities from the dunes of North Africa to the frozen barren snowy wastes of northern Russia. They were not guns that were meant for demonstration, they were meant for combat. The German army used the term infantry gun to describe guns that were solely designed and distributed to be mounted by infantry units. Just like most of the artillery weapons employed by the German army in the Second World War, the 75mm light infantry gun 18 was developed before the Nazis' rise to power in 1933. Its development was during the post-World War I period, when the Reichswehr was learning the lessons of the war. Among the lessons learned was that infantry needed a light artillery piece to push forward in their own advance, and to protect them up close when attacking enemy fortifications. This gun initially appeared in 1927, and was still present on the battlefield in 1945, although by then it was being supplanted by heavy mortars in infantry formations. The IG-18 was employed on every front, and in every theater wherever German troops were engaged. Its light, compact design made it a convenient conversion for mounted forces. The design utilized a simple shotgun-type breech, which allowed infantry to get a very high rate of fire. This can be seen here in this film of these guns in action in North Africa in 1941. The barrel had an elevation of -10 to +75 degrees. At highest elevation, the IG-18 could deliver effective plunging fire. The greatest range was contingent upon the ammunition fired, but could fire out to a maximum of 3,880 yards. The gun was towed by horses or light trucks or 1-ton half-tracks. The SIG-33 was the biggest and heaviest of the German infantry guns. Although the designation SIG-33 put forward entered production in 1933, it in fact entered Reichswehr service in the same year as the IG-18. With a caliber of 150 mm, the SIG-33 served throughout the war, although it was restricted to European and Russian theaters of war. It failed to enter service in North Africa. The reason was mainly because it was a horse-drawn system, and no horses were employed by the German forces in that theater. It was well liked by the troops as a good and stable gun. Its biggest drawback was that it was extremely heavy and more than what an infantry support weapon could ever transport. Plottings to limit this through the use of alloys instead of steel, and certain components on the chassis were foiled by the war's outbreak and the diversion of such metals towards aircraft production. The range of the weapon depended on the charge with which the shell was fired. An average heavy explosive shell had a range of 615 yards to a maximum of 5,140 yards. The fire rate was between 2 and 3 rounds per minute. SIG-33 had the advantage of being the first artillery weapon mounted on a self-propelled chassis when 38 of these guns were converted to fit a Panzer I modified chassis and were supplied to the Panzer II, Panzer III, and 38 of these chassis. Used in all theaters and on fronts where the German army was deployed, the 105 mm light field howitzer 18 was the standard artillery gun at divisional level. It was manufactured before the rise of Hitler by Rheinmetall in 1929 to 1930. Several years passed before it was taken on by the German army in 1935. It quickly supplanted and eventually replaced the army's previous weapon of that type, the FH-16, which had been manufactured by Krupp during World War I. The design, despite being changed, was to be in production and service until 1945. It was much appreciated by the users. Its best feature was that its crew could shoot the gun easily and comfortably. Its split-trail design allowed it to be manhandled quickly, as can be seen in this film. One of its primary virtues was that it was extremely reliable. This was especially important after 1941, when the climatic extremes in the Soviet Union required that weapons work on demand when the temperatures were in the high 40 centigrade or many degrees below zero. The gun could be lowered to -6 degrees and raised to a total of +40. Range, as with most guns, was charge dependent. With the maximum powder charge, the F-18 was able to fire a 32-pound high explosive round to 11,675 yards or 10,675 meters. So in North Africa, FHA units were used in the anti-tank role, for which they were fitted with a special shell. The initial 10-centimeter Panzergranate shell was subsequently replaced by the more powerful 10-centimeter Panzergranate red shell. Either was designed to achieve a maximum range of 1,640 yards and penetrate the frontal armor of most Allied tanks. Thus, the desperate Russian winter of 1941 to 42 witnessed the divisional light artillery tested by brutal weather conditions and an unyielding enemy. Caught out by the Soviet winter, which in 1941 was the worst in 50 years, gun crews of artillery had to endure freezing temperatures. Proper winter gear lacking, these 105 mm gun crews loaded and fired their guns day after day. As with its most heavily weaponed gun, the 150 mm howitzer, the weakness of the FHA team was that it was not highly mobile. Most of these weapons were horse-drawn, with a minority being towed by the 3-ton half-tracks. The Army was keenest to give this highly tested gun greater mobility. The growing obsolescence of the Panzer II light tank supplied most of the surviving chassis for the conversion into self-propelled guns. The Vespa was produced by the Alkit Company in early 1942. It was a 105 mm LH-18 mounted self-propelled gun. This gun came into production in the same year and made 676 by 1944. The remaining other 105 mm guns were still being towed in the same way, and pictures of them being pulled by horses are still in existence in 1945. The utility of the 105 mm can be measured by how many were employed in tandem with the larger 150 mm howitzer, as shown here. Artillery was particularly valuable during the bitter winter of 1941 to 42. The Germans clung to villages in order to gain refuge from the hideous cold, and Soviet attacks were intended to destroy any structure in which the Germans could gain such refuge. German artillery still proved to be very effective at destroying these Russian raids. gun crews sunned themselves in the late Italian summer sun outside Salerno weeks or days before the Allied invasion there. It had a muzzle brake on the main gun in order to be able to fire shells of greater power and longer range. 105mm batteries were employed in steadily heavier action from midsummer 1943 until the end of the war on the Eastern Front. Vespa German attempts at hurrying back the ever-growing Soviet tide of attacks left them in continuous action from the Ukraine all the way to the outskirts of Leningrad. The Germans were pushed back into Poland and East Prussia by the latter part of 1944. The 105mm light howitzer was in service literally until the end of war. The backbone of the German medium artilleries in the war was the 15cm Schwer field howitzer, or SFH-18. It was being developed and manufactured at the same time as the heavy 10cm, which shared the same carriage, but can be identified by the shorter barrel. Both weapons were being designed by Rheinmetall and Krupp in the late 1920s for the Reichswehr, and were introduced into service in 1933-34. But the Army later lost faith in the 10cm gun and focused on the 15cm caliber used all over the war. The same caliber in a different version, known as the FH-36, was purchased by the Army as early as 1935, and this was differentiated by the utilization of alloys in the case of steel, and also in certain components of the carriage. The most notable aspect of this model is the muzzle brake. As the war was initiated and most of the metal alloys were utilized in the aircraft sector, the FH-36 was produced in limited numbers and discontinued in 1942. The 15cm SFH-18 is visible in nearly all the movie footage of the German forces during war from the beginning of war to the conclusion of war. It was also carried by horse and also transported in the advanced echelons of the military by being towed behind an 8-ton half-track. These being utilized herein are involved in the first several months of Operation Barbarossa. The ability to move heavy artillery rapidly and keep it in striking distance of the Panzer spearheads allowed leading tank units to call in heavy artillery fire when faced with issues it could not displace. Keeping this type of firepower close to the front moving forward was also found to be psychologically most effective. The performance of this 15cm gun depended as always upon the shell type and charge. The standard high-explosive shell weighed around 43.5 kilograms. When fitted with one-bagged charge, its range was around 4,000 yards. When the full charge was fired, the range of the gun was extended to over 14,000 yards. Efforts to increase the range on this weapon even further included the experimental use of the first rocket-propelled shell in 1941. It could only be used on muzzle brake weapons and had a theoretically greater range of over 20,000 yards or 19,000 meters. It did not work and was taken out of use comparatively soon. A huge variety of disparate types of projectiles were produced for this gun, ranging from shells for use against concrete strongpoints, hollow charge shells, and smoke shells. The German gun arm took hugely heavy casualties in the years 1941-42 during the campaign in Russia. Hundreds of these guns were lost in the Moscow retreat, and in the summer 1942 offensive, ending in the loss of the 6th Army at Stalingrad. By the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, the artillery branch was not as well placed as the armored branch. Even air power was used to compensate for the deficit in the absence of masses of German heavy guns in this battle. By now it was also gradually becoming apparent to the army that the vulnerability of this weapon was that it could not be quickly transported other than by a prime mover. Despite this, the Russian weather was such that after rain, or during the muddy season, even half-tracks found it difficult to tow guns of such weight. The 15cm, which weighed approximately 5.5 tons. In 1942, it was decided to mount the gun on a fully tracked chassis so that it could be given the mobility that it needed. The later Hummel or Bumblebee used the Panzer III-IV chassis to mount the gun in an open mounting. Two of the strongest German guns used during the entire World War II and used in all theaters of operation were the 17 and 21cm very heavy guns. They use the same chassis and differ by virtue of barrel length. Though big and heavy guns, their ingenious design allowed them to be handled relatively easily in the field, whereas transportation involved taking the guns apart and moving them on two separate chassis. A half-track pulled the barrel and the other pulled the body of the gun. 12-ton half-tracks were normally used to carry out the task. The first of the two weapons to appear was the 21-centimeter model introduced by Krupp in 1939. The gun was assigned to the motorized artillery of the Army. 19 batteries had been established and were extensively used on the Eastern Front by the Russian campaign. Although it was highly effective at destroying well-protected and defended targets, its weight of just over 16 tons was the reason the Army had chosen to replace it with the 17-centimeter gun. It had almost twice the range of the 21-centimeter model. Production of the 21-centimeter gun was to be phased out in June 1942, having produced 487. But so attritional were losses in this caliber of gun that the 21-centimeter was retained and production was increased in 1943 to 44, and in March 1945 there were still 218 in service. The 21-centimeter model could be traversed 0 to 70 degrees, and its maximum range was well in excess of 16,000 meters. The authorized shell for the type was the 21-centimeter Granat 18, weighing 113 kilograms, and also the 21-centimeter Granat 18 weighing 121 kilograms. This was an anti-concrete shell, and a highly equipped crew could fire 1 round per 2 minutes from this gun. The 17-centimeter gun, also referred to as the Matterhorn, came into commission in 1941. The Army's first complaint about the 21-centimeter, that it was too heavy, was by no means alleviated by the arrival of the Matterhorn. It was 17.25 tons in weight. Its transport was very similar, although it could be towed short distances with a limber without removing the barrel from the chassis. The 17-centimeter had a range depending on the power and capacity of the case charge. Range maximum with charge, for which in turn provided a muzzle velocity of approximately 3,000 feet per second to the 138-pound high-explosive shell, allowed it to range in excess of 32,000 yards. The 21 and the 17-centimeter were normally used together. By far the largest number of these guns were employed in the East, where the guns were employed in small quantities in the siege of Leningrad through the Crimea. Although associated with the Great War artillery, spotting balloons operated in the quieter sectors of the Eastern Front. This was possible because the Soviet Air Force was not so prominent in the skies over Russia, so the balloons could be used without fear of being shot down. Employing information radio down from the balloon coordinates are worked out and fed to the gun team. There were also instances where K-18 and K-21s were used with Flak 88s and 150mm artillery, and not used independently. From fall 1943, this series indicates a 21-centimeter Mirza being used with 150mm heavy guns, 5mm medium guns, and Flak 88s in the Dnipro Bend in South Russia. Artillery fire support is being given as Panzers and SPWs are about to move against Soviet armor in the distance. Under the circumstances, the 21-centimeter gun power could rival the 88's range and deliver an unusually dense rate of fire on the target. One of the more impressive of the German heavy gun designs was the 24-centimeter Cannon 3, or Petersdorf. It was designed and constructed between 1935 and 1938 and was a very advanced and modern design. And its only flaw was that it was heavy. At 83 tons, it had to be transported in no fewer than 6 separate loads. Although the designers had gone to a lot of trouble to ensure that it should be simple to assemble, it took no less than 25 men and 1.5 hours to assemble the gun to fire. The Army decided that the investment in such a weapon could not be justified. Seeing service throughout the war as one of the primary anti-aircraft weapons of the Wehrmacht was the 20mm Fluke of their Cannon 1338. The latter weapon, a development of the earlier model, served either in a single barrel or feeling form. That is, 4 guns brought together and operated as one weapon. These cannons proved most effective in defending targets against flying aircraft at low level right up to 5,500 feet. With a full 360-degree rapid traverse when placed at 40 degrees when used in this period of carriage, the weapon's elevation from -12 to +90 degrees permitted a very rapid tracking of targets. Such was the versatility of this weapon that it was also extensively employed in the ground role and worked high rate of fire of up to 280 rounds per minute on a sunken setting, in the case of the Flak 30, providing ground troops with highly effective close support. It was also mounted on 1-ton half tracks and used by the Kriegsmarine in either single-barreled or feeling form. The Flak 30 was first introduced into Luftwaffe service in 1935 where it was originally towed by the Krupp Boxer light truck. While this gun served a distinction in the early stage of the war, the Luftwaffe had decided even before the onset of the conflict that it needed an improved variant with a much higher rate of fire. So the Flak 38 was raised to a maximum of 480 rounds per minute, although a more practical rate was 220 rounds to save on barrel work. The Flak 38 was really a redesign of the earlier weapon. It entered service at the start of the year 1940 in preparation for the Northwest Campaign, where it was employed alongside the Flak 30, defending the River Meuse bridges, which were being bombed by the Armée de l'Air and Royal Air Force. The Flak 30 was employed alongside the 38 until the mid-war period, but had largely disappeared by the second part of the war. The Flak 38 was still in service during the war. The flak feeling was something which developed in late 1940 as a hasty and expeditious solution to the Luftwaffe's need to get more ammunition into the air to maximize the odds of actually killing the target. Mounting 4 Flak 38s on a single mount enabled the collective rate of fire of all 4 barrels to be brought up to a maximum of some 1,900 rounds per minute. However, a more practical rate service to enhance barrel life saw this come down to around 7,800 rounds per minute. The flak feeling was employed alongside the 137mm and 88mm flak guns in the aerial defense of Germany. By 1944, the Luftwaffe had come to the conclusion that 20mm was too small a caliber to be effective against the aircraft being deployed by the Allies and the Russians.